Hi, guys. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Non-Typical Project. Today's episode is sponsored by Denny Dennis Sporting Goods. They're my local hometown archery shop that I've been going to for years. They've got top-of-the-line gear and even better people. So if you ever find yourself in the St. Louis, Missouri, or surrounding areas, be sure to swing on in, check them out, and tell them I sent you. Especially if you've got a blown-up compound or crossbow, their archery techs absolutely love that kind of work. So without any further ado, let's get straight into the episode. All right, guys, welcome back to the Non-Typical Project. Today, we've got quite the intro read. We have a guest that is a legend in the world of archery and bow hunting. Today, it is none other than Wayne the Herd Bull Endicott. Wayne is a husband, a father, a grandfather. He's the owner of the Bow Rack, an iconic pro shop and archery hub, hosting renowned guests and friends of Wayne, such as Cameron Haynes and Joe Rogan. From winning tournaments to chasing game across the country, Wayne has a decorated career in the archery industry that sets a high bar and a great example to follow. Wayne, welcome to the Non-Typical Project.
Thank you, Dean. That was
I
quite the intro. I winning tournaments, that's been a minute.
that was one
Nobody
of
would
the things.
I'm having trouble even remembering that. It's been so long ago.
The
I just
videos are
coaching
out
in there.
there. The videos are out there and I've seen them. And, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. I heard you at one point say that you were going to the tournaments all the time, kind of as for the shop. And you said you realized that a lot of people just didn't really hold a lot of weight with them, or they didn't care for it that much. Was that a big part of why you kind of stepped away from that scene, or how did that come to be?
Yeah, like anybody, I mean, you love to shoot your bow and I got, I'm pretty competitive and I got deep into competitive archery for a while and you know, just locally, I stood on a few platforms, but it had some moments over the years. But yeah, I was obsessed with shooting my bow, and it didn't sell a lot of bows and arrows. So I found out real quick that I needed to spend my time, probably running a pro shop and coaching and helping everybody else be successful rather than just chasing, what I love to do, and
Yeah,
it's 2 hours a day, practice time or 3 hours a day practice time, and then gone every weekend. That's not a way to run a pro shop. I know a lot of
absolutely.
owners that have tried that, and some have actually been successful with it. I couldn't figure out how to be successful with it, and just because I was winning didn't make anybody want to come do business with me either. I mean, that really wasn't a selling point, until I turned it around and really learned how to serve the public. Because I think this year makes 38 years in the archery industry, and
Wow.
I'm in a pro shop, and so, I was a slow learner, and in the late '80s, early '90s, I was just shooting a bow, and not a lot of attention to business except on weekdays.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting balance there because you prioritize that, the business side of it and coaching and getting people into it. Did you ever feel a struggle of like did you ever have that feeling of like missing out on the tournament scene and then going around to those events, or did the love for the shop kind of overweigh that?
Well, when you've got 5 kids and you have to pay the bills and you're working side jobs in the off season, archery industry for me, the pro shop, for some reason my wife and I just wanted to hang on to it. And in the winters sometimes she would run the shop with one employee and I'd swing a hammer all winter in the off season, so just we wanted to hang on to the shop. I mean, it meant a lot to us. um but yeah, I mean, the learning curve was, you know, if you're starving to death, you can figure out how to do business and do, a better business. And, learning to serve the public, when you're young, I mean, you've just got aspirations of your own, and, I just thought, man, I'm going to stand on some platforms. I'm going to put all my heart and soul into this shooting competitive and found out real quick that didn't pay the bills. I mean, it's not Tiger Woods, it's the archery industry. And unless you're the top of the food chain, and there's always somebody better. Everybody loves
Absolutely.
to compete, and everybody kind of competes at their own level. And some guys have some natural talent, and some people are driven and have natural talent. and you get the Levi Morgans and the J Bars and Brady Ellis, and you get all these guys that are just outstanding, and a thousand more that are outstanding pro archers, you know, and they figured out how to do it, and I just needed to run a pro shop and feed a family, and found out real quick that, my passion for that, was equal, but I just needed to give it as much, my full attention and not be shooting competitive.
Yeah. Was there a time period there? You kind of mentioned you're swinging hammers in the off season, and your wife would be running the shop and kind of balancing things out that way. Was there a time period or maybe an event that the swing and the hammer in the off season stopped, and the shop, maybe something about it changed to where that was the full attention, the side work kind of went away and the shop was taken off more?
Yeah, in all through the 90s, it was part-time work, but in 1999, I bought a piece of property. I had, it was back in the days when banks and bankers were real banks and bankers. I had a Terry Gent, he was a prince of a man. I mean, I walked into his office one day and I said, "Terry, there's a piece of land just down the street from me, blank property. It's for sale. It's not that much money. I want to buy it and I want to build a shop." And he believed in me. He'd been doing business with me for probably 8 or 9 years, and he knew my wife and I, and he like opened up his desk drawer and threw me a set of blank checks, and he said, "I'll open you up on a line of credit. Go buy the property." And he goes, "We'll build a shop on a line of credit. We'll switch you over to a small business loan." And that was in 19. I completed it from start to finish, and it was good to have that background of being in carpentry and working concrete and everything, and then having all kinds of friends that helped me. Had tons of friends that jumped in and helped me, being in the trades, and from start to finish, from the day we poured the concrete to the day I moved in, was 71 days. So we were really burning it
Wow.
hard, and that was paid parking lot and the whole works. So yeah, and so I can still remember standing at the front door for the first time, watching my planner and my inspectors walking around and checking all the boxes. You had to have, landscaping had to be perfect, so many, shrubs and trees planted and in the front and all that, and they're clipping along there, and they walk up and they hand me the ticket, and man, we were moving everything out of the leased building we'd been in, and we were moving into our old building, and that was in 1999, and that's what really kicked it off. Was in 1999. We built that building, and it was kind of we're digging our heels in, and we're going to make this thing work. And I think people just really they wanted to support us, because they saw our commitment, and I never thought I'd outgrow that shop, but we actually 2 years ago I jumped in and tore the back of it off, and we added 3,000 more square feet. So we doubled the retail, and we made our range quite a bit bigger. So we added 3,000 more square feet to the archery shop, and it was much needed. Now we're way more efficient, and we have two workstations, four bow presses, two draw boards. We tune right there. My wife's old office, we turned it into a paper tuning room, and so yeah, we're a lot more efficient now. So that was that, and that came after, oh my gosh, from 1999 to 2024. So we did business for a lot of years before, we decided, hey, we just got to expand, and it's been good.
Yeah. What is it that makes, the bow rack? I'm a Missouri boy, and it's on my bucket list. Like, I've got to go to the bow rack one day. I got to see it. What is it that makes the bow rack almost, gosh, it's almost like a landmark for archery. Like it's like a bucket list or a checklist thing that guys want to go see it, want to go to the bow rack. How did the bow rack turn into that for archers?
Well, Ron Schreiber started the bow rack. I bought it as an existing business. He started it in 1973, and so it had deep roots. I mean, it'd been around. I think only Archers Afield. Well, we may be the oldest archer. I'd have to talk to Mike at Archers Afield up in Portland, um, or Jim up at Archers Afield in Portland. I'd have to talk to him and find out when he started. But Ron started in 1973, so those deep roots started, and I bought it in end of '89, the beginning of 1990, and just time in the industry, and then all the different people, like, our role models, our mentors, our guys that we looked up to big time was like Larry Jones, Neil Summers. They were in our area. They were big time, bow hunters. And Larry had, Larry Jones calls. He had Jones calls, and then he had some of the best early videos, that basically, were on the market, back in the old VHS days. And he
Yeah.
did a good job with his videos, so and Larry, all these guys were right here in our hometown. And then of course, Cameron Haynes, is a big part of the bow rack, and Cam's always, Cam and I have been friends for years. We hunted together when we were just kids, and of course, Cam went on to who he is today, which is, basically undeniably, one of the top figures in bow hunting and ultra running today. And so Cam's had a big part of it. And then his podcast, I mean, we roll everybody through there, from Aaron Rodgers to Jelly Roll to, Michael Chandler. I mean, everybody. I mean, back in the early days for his podcast, I mean, Rogan came through. And when he was first, when Cam first met him, we, got him set up with an old Hoyt Defiant, 80-pound Hoyt Defiant and stuff. So, it's just, Cam's probably promoted us as much as anybody. I love the man. I mean, I'm proud of him. The whole Keep Hammering podcast thing has gone giant, for him. And honestly, he worked a blue collar job, right up until he retired. What's it been, 3 years ago now? And he maintained everything he was doing, and all his writing and book writing and hunting and everything, while he was working. And so, he's got great work ethic. That's what people don't understand about him. But, those things, made us, promoted us. I would say, well, I'll give you an analogy. I used to river guide. I used to be a river guide when I was younger. Salmon, steelhead, drift boats. I mean, that's big out here in the West. We've got a lot of rivers, and I've taken a lot of different people, fishing. And Kent Waggle, he's the winningest football coach in Oregon history, high school football coach in Oregon history. Two different high schools, South Umpqua High School and Marshfield High School. And I fished with Kent quite a bit. And when you had Kent on the river, the rivers are crowded when we're fishing for salmon. There's a lot of boats, and he was like having a celebrity in your boat. I mean, everybody's like, Coach Waggle, they're just like, every boat is like, everybody on the South Coast just, this guy just walks on water, because I mean, they knew who he was. I mean, and I asked him, not only I saw his notoriety, and how much respect everybody had for him, but his record of being the winningest, football coach in Oregon high school history. And I asked him, I go, Kent, I go, what's it take? What's it take to be the winningest football coach in Oregon's history? And he goes, oh, it's easy. He goes, when the kids are little and they start playing flag football, he goes, I go to their games. He goes, I learn their names. He goes, when the coach, they have a little breather for timeout, at halftime. He goes, I talk to the kids. He goes, and he goes, when they get in middle school and they start putting on pads, he goes, I open up my gym in the summertime and I invite them in and I teach them how to strength train. And he goes, he goes, by the time they're in high school, I know their strengths. He goes, I know what they need to work on. He goes, it's simple. You love the kids. And, so it's kind of given me an appreciation for my customers, along with my faith in Christ, which kind of comes natural. It's, you love your brother. I mean, everybody that walks through the door, is potentially family, and I want to make them successful. I mean, archery's
Yeah,
hard. And I mean, our goal, and I've got great employees. I mean, I got
absolutely.
I got I got the best kids working for, and men and kids. Yeah, I got some young guys, and I got some guys that have been with me forever. And Chris Stewart, Trenton Stoops. I've had kids that were like my stepkids, like Kellen Morgan. They were like my stepkids. He's running an archery shop, up in Portland area. It worked for me for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, and he grew up, when he grew up, my son and him were friends, and I drug him around. But I got all these great employees, and, they're great with people. And, it just, like I said, potentially everybody that walks through that door, I still love working with kids. Um, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday I had lessons all 3 nights, and all 3 people, are, brand new archers. 2 of them have, or 4 of them had never shot a bow, and I just
Wow.
love that. I love giving
Yeah,
the opportunity, to do lessons with people and just introduce them to archery. And, after all these years, I still just it's just crazy how awesome that is, to see the expression on their face. And, I think I can get them the path of least resistance to get, some success in archery. I mean, the 2 kids I had last night, husband and wife, they're just kids, they just married. Oh my gosh, they shot fantastic. And the husband and wife both had a lot of natural talent. I had them shooting Genesis bows, and at 10 yards, they had groups where the husband had groups where he had 5 arrows touching. And I mean, you see stuff like that and you're like, dude, you have no idea how hard. I mean, a Genesis bow is user friendly, but how hard it is to be accurate with it. And to come in, and he's never shot a bow. And I work with him, for 2 or 3 rounds, and he's shooting groups like that. It's impressive. And so all that's just such a reward. And so every day you go to work, and it's just a fantastic reward. I just love it. Every day I still just absolutely cherish the time I have in the archery shop. So that's a long way around to answer
that's
your
awesome.
question.
No, that's all. I'm glad you took us there because that is incredible, and it's one of the things that's become more and more valuable to me. Spending time at my local pro shop here in town and being able to help people out. And one thing that always, and I've kind of saved this question for you. I've talked to a few people on the podcast, and I've been saving this one. Um, Archery is one of those things that it seems like everyone's got their own way of doing it. And I've spent time with a lot of guys, and I've gotten, very fortunate to have traveled around to some ASA events, talked to people like Tim Gillingham and Kyle
Oh, sure.
Douglas
Yeah.
and just fantastic people. But everyone kind of has their own way. Is one of the
Yeah.
ways that I've kind of one of the things I picked up on that trail. When you're taking those people that are new to it and they're trying to get their introduction, how are you guiding them to make sure that they're set up for success, but also, you know, knowing that there are so many different ways? It's not really a one size fits all, but people are going to kind of develop a style or a rhythm that
Exactly.
fits them. How do you guide them
E
through that?
exactly. If you can't learn this out of archery, I mean, repetition and repeatability, can if you can do everything wrong, and if you do it identically wrong every single time, you can have success in archery. I've
Yeah,
seen every kind of form there is, and I could talk about form until the cows come home. I've learned, facial features, body types, strength levels. You know, there's just, some guys, the way their facial features and the way they're developed, they cannot shoot an index style release. They have to shoot a handheld. And there's guys that, I've tried to get them on a handheld, and there's just no way. And you give them an index style release, and they can never shoot anything else. They can't shoot a handheld, and there's no absolutes, but there's a path of least resistance that you have to recognize for everybody. And, things that are crucial is draw length, and so I
sure.
think, fitting somebody, and my tagline is always comfort equals accuracy. My goal with somebody, and all my guys that work for me at the pro shop, our goal is when somebody comes in, we have to make them comfortable. And you have to recognize what makes somebody uncomfortable, and I have all kinds of ways, like, I'm big on feet, stance. I mean, open stance, closed stance, even stance. I'm big on stance, and I've got a quick way to show everybody how to do it, and I'll spoil that. I mean, I have everybody take their index finger and put it on a spot and close their non-dominant eye and cover the spot with their fingers, with their feet set like they think that they would shoot. And then, I'm gonna have them really study the spot and really cover it with the end of their finger, right? And there's all kinds of ways you can do this, but this is just a quick way without a bow. And so you're standing there, and it's just like you're shooting, and you're holding that finger on the spot. Then you close the dominant eye, you weave and bob a little bit. Then you imagine, before you open your eye, that you're putting that finger back on the spot where you just had it with your eyes closed, and then you just open your dominant eye. And if the finger's right or left, you adjust the feet to where you keep doing this exercise until the finger is on the spot. that's generally the what you will do for centering. And, you've never been to a 3D shoot
Wow.
ever where you didn't step up to a stake and see where everybody's dug their feet in. Well, most archers know exactly what their stance is. So when they draw that bow, they're not having to go right or left. All they're going to do is settle that pin, but the pin's already in the center. And, in bow hunting, I mean, if you're walking, like I had this happen one time. I had a buck that I spotted in a snowstorm and he's chasing a doe and he's like 120 yards away down through some big timber and I'm creeping up on him. And I look over to my right and, I'm right-handed. So I'm like this and I look over to my right and this buck's walking up right here. Well, this doesn't work, right? The first thing you have to do is you have to set your
Yeah.
feet. And if you set your feet correctly, then when you draw your bow, that pin is gonna be identically on the spot that you already looked at for vitals. And basically all you have to do is do double, when I'm bow hunting, it's like check, check, double check, and that's me and I use my pin as a blocker. I look at the spot when the pin that I desire, like it was a 30-yard shot. This particular incident was a 30-yard shot. So I already know it's my set, without a doubt, I shoot a 5-pin sight for hunting. And, my second pin, and so I'm
Yeah.
looking at this buck right in his vitals. It's check, check, double check, boom, execution, right? And the buck happened to hold
Yeah.
and, drilled him and he, 80-yard dash and it's over. But, all that said, that path to comfort can come a lot of different ways. It starts with the feet. Front hand is giant. I kinda teach, a broken wrist palm in grip on a compound. I kinda teach a high wrist, straight arm on traditional bows. Um, I like 3 fingers under for traditional. I put my thumb under my little finger, I slide into my jaw, corner of my mouth. And there again, there's not a right or wrong. I mean, it can be index, middle, or third for a traditional shooter shooting. I like a forward posture. I like an aggressive, kind of a forward posture. I like a level
Mhm.
draw with traditional gear. You come up with a recurve or longbow and you level draw into your anchor. I think that's paramount. I mean, if you do a swing draw, there's people that can do it. I'm always puzzled how they can do it because it only gives the left arm a second to center, and then it's a
Yeah.
release of the arrow. I come up and I call it staging. When I'm shooting traditional, I come up and I stage. I look at the spot and I try to draw, and then when I come in here, I slow it down till I hit a touch command release. And that's traditional. When I'm shooting a compound, I had a kid message me yesterday that I met like 2 years ago and stayed in touch with him a little bit, and he goes, "Wayne," he goes, "I'm struggling so bad." He goes, "I cannot get on the target." My he goes, "I freeze low." He goes, "I try to come up to the spot and I freeze low." I go, "Well, it's just like bench pressing, buddy." I go, "Set the torso, draw slightly above the spot, and, when you're bench pressing, you can come down with a lot of weight, strong, but when you go up, you're weak. So, you wanna set it to where when you come down, you're stronger. When you're in the spot, you're strongest." And then you let it, you pull back tension, you let it hover, you check, check, double check, triple check if you're shooting tournaments, 5 to 7 second, release and then execution and it's in the spot. And so if you come up from the bottom, I've never understood anybody that could come from the bottom up because, where they drew their bow, that was the path of least
Yeah.
resistance. They set their torso to that and so when they drew their bow, they were in their comfort zone right there. And so to come up, they're out of their comfort zone. So then, they feel it right across the top of their shoulder and it just stalls them and they can't get the pin up to the spot. So all that said, those are just a couple paths to get somebody comfortable. Of course, he can't be overbowed. I mean, poundage is irrelevant anymore. I mean, bow hunting is all shot placement. Um, you're never gonna improve if you're uncomfortable with the draw, and then,
Yeah.
I teach people if you draw with a low elbow, it's all shoulder. If you draw with a high elbow and you twist and you rotate the shoulders and use the torso, you're using, your back and your torso to draw the bow and very little shoulder. So, that's those things like I had a fellow this week and he was really struggling drawing and I'm like, "Hey, I'm gonna show you a little bit different. I mean, come in, start out with your bow arm all the way out, pick that elbow up and come over the top. and see if that's easier. He's like, "Oh, dude," he goes, "I've never done that." He goes, "That's super easy." And so
Yeah.
it doesn't always work for everybody. Some people aren't strong that way, so there again, it's not absolute, but, I just try to figure out the path of least resistance to make somebody as comfortable as possible, you know, and when we somebody comes in to buy a bow, I mean, I don't know, we can rarely get them done with, fitting, paper tuning, getting the bow all tuned up, perfect holes through paper. We're gonna go sight them in the range. We wanna make sure they're zeroed. We're gonna tie the peep in, then we're gonna double check everything and make sure everything's, usually we need them for an hour, hour
Yeah.
and 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If
Absolutely.
45 minutes would be like rushing somebody through, because all that takes time. So, typically on, a Friday or Saturday, if we've got 4 or 5 bow sales, I mean, oh my gosh, we're plugged up. I mean, because 'cause I'll have 4 or 5 guys, working and, it can really tie us up, so, typically, that's just our rodeo, but, that's how we get, everybody fitted and comfortable. I think it's super important, to take those steps and then, you got some guy that's buying a bow and is I've had this happen hundreds of times over the years. He's got a 4 or 5-year-old and, "Dad, I wanna shoot a bow. Dad, I wanna shoot a bow." It's "Okay, son, I'm gonna get mine set up." Like, just you need to be patient and, I'll take a few seconds and I'll jump in and grab a little mini Genesis and some feathered arrows, and I'll get the little guy going over in the corner, and just get him rolling, while I'm working, and I can take a break with
Yeah.
that with dad and, make sure that he's having a good time and stuff. And if you don't have time to do that, that's just I mean, you got a little kid, he's like a kid in a candy store, he's looking at all these bows, he's begging dad. I mean, I can't let that go. I mean, I've got to, I think that I don't know if there's too many times that I haven't just grabbed a, little mini Genesis off the rack and got some little feather arrows and get him on a little target over in the corner of the range and just, get him going. So that's important too. You can't overlook that.
Absolutely. I mean, that can be the start of something huge for that kid. If they take to it the way that a lot of us all have, that could be their first introduction to it, which is invaluable
Mm.
to them and invaluable to the culture and to the whole community at
Right.
at large. So that's huge. You've gotten to see so much change. I mean, when you talk about 38 years of running the bow rack. You've seen a lot of tech change. You've seen a lot of bow hunting and competition archery change. What sticks out to you in all those years of like being these, kind of the biggest changes or the biggest things you've noticed that are just different about how archery is done and how archery hunting is done?
Well, the way as far as archery's done, the compound bow, the CNC machine, I remember the first time I saw an alpine archery bow, it was and the riser was a machine riser. And all of a sudden we're like, what is that? And 'cause we had all cast riser bows. I mean, nobody knew what a machine riser bow was. And, that changed the face of archery because, I mean, back in the day, you'd always go, well, why don't you guys come up with this or this or this? And it's like, oh, well, every time we come up with a die cast mold, it's $250,000 to build that mold to make risers. And so we have to make a lot of bows and arrows to pay for that. And, when the CNC, lathe come along, it just changed the face of archery. Cams, limbs, everything. I mean, everything changed because of technology. And, so all of a sudden design, everything started changing. We went from overdraws and, cutting arrows anywhere from 26 to 24 to 26 inches long and and shooting overdraws. And all of a sudden, carbon arrows were out and we're throwing all the overdraws away. And, aluminum arrows are getting very unpopular. I remember the first year that gold tip came out, they were like one of the very first like woven carbon arrows. We had some protruded carbon like Beeman and stuff. There was some protruded carbon arrows and they really weren't, I mean, accurate. They weren't straight. I mean, nobody was really, there was a little bit of excitement about them, but nothing like when, Gold Tip hit the scene. And then Easton right after that, just changed the whole face of arrow manufacturing pretty much. And when they came out with the Axis arrow, I mean, that totally changed the arrow market, because all of a sudden you've got, internal components, you've got, a 5 millimeter shaft that's tough, and, you've got physical weight in a carbon arrow, so and then you've got spine. I mean, for years we had up to a 340 spine, but I remember tuning a lot of 80-pound bows to a 340 spine. It was possible to do because we did it. But then they came out with all the heavier spines, so it made life a little bit easier there. But yeah, so those are some things that changed, archery, and basically the machining, on broadheads anymore. The same thing, for when I first bought the shop. I mean, oh, there was garbage for broadheads. Oh my gosh. I mean, everybody shot thunderhead, or just old Bear razor heads, because, MA3s, something that wouldn't fall apart, something that wouldn't shed like a blade that you would shave with, it was so thin it would just snap,
Yeah.
you know. The company's still in business, so I'm not going to mention any name, but there was a broadhead company, and they would give us heads, as dealers. They would give us lots of heads, and I remember I shot a buck one time 3 times, and it looked like, the shots were good, and it was just slowing him down, but he was not dying. And, when I got up to him, I wound up, having to shoot him again and again, and I pulled these arrows out of his side, and all the blades are missing on a 3 blade. And I called them, and they said, "Oh yeah, we had some
Oh
carbon blades come
no.
through, so the heads we sent to you had all carbon blades." Well, you could literally take and put a leather glove on, grab them, and barely turn them, and they'd snap like a potato chip.
Oh
So, those days are
gosh.
gone, right? And then, the very first, mechanical heads, I mean, I think what's given mechanical broadheads, a bad name, and there's still some pretty, I think, poorly built mechanicals out there, but not so, the majority of the mechanicals that are built today are pretty good heads, but that was the other thing, the early mechanicals like punch cutters. I mean, they weren't any good. Sorry, they just were not any good. They made them ille that head right there, when it came out, it was a couple years, and Oregon made them illegal, and we didn't. I think it's 7 years now that actually our game commission, passed, resolution that made mechanical heads legal in Oregon, so there again, the whole machining market, has kind of changed the face of broadheads, and the lethal capability of a broadhead, whether it's an iron will, or, single blade, cut on impact, or, whether it's a Grim Reaper, Pro 3. I mean, we've got, some fantastic heads and everything in between. There's a lot of really, really good broadheads out there. So arrows, broadheads, releases have improved, but they haven't changed a ton. I mean, the boa strap. I mean, I sell more boas, wrist strap for index, like Cam Haynes and the Spot Hog Wise guy. We sell a ton of Wise guys, and they're a great release. They've got a great trigger. It's
Oh
adjustable,
yeah.
but the boa strap is so comfortable, and if a guy's hunting in cold weather, you can just leave it loose so your hand doesn't freeze off like you would with a buckle, or a Velcro. And then you see a I run a boa, and, so I see an animal, I just, like, automatically give it, just a half twist every time I even see something, but it keeps my hands working in the late season, when it's,
Yeah.
between 27 and 38 degrees. My hand isn't falling off all day, because I've got but those are just little things in the archery industry. I mean, the big things we learned early on. When I first bought the shop, they were still trying to make compound bows with wood limbs. That didn't work. I think Martin Archery was the only
No.
one that actually built a bow with a set of wood limbs that didn't blow up. And Martin Archery had it figured out. I mean, because they had the whole Howlett plant, and they knew how to make a wood limb and make it last forever. But they were like the only ones. Everybody else that tried to build a wood limb, they just blew up. And so I fixed a lot of bows in the early days. Man, it was a rotating door. If you shot, that's the other thing that I've seen in archery. I mean, reliability, lifetime warranties, companies like Hoyt Matthews, PSE. I mean, bows anymore, I mean, they're just built to last for a lifetime. And
Absolutely.
back in the day, in the late 80s, early 90s, all I did was fix bows. if you shot them, they were gonna break, and the
Yeah.
sights were too. We used to sell a lot of fine line sights back in the day because fine lines didn't break, but all the other sights that were out there just break or somebody'd fall on them, they'd bend over. I mean, it I would almost dare somebody to try to destroy a spot hog sight. The new booner or or a grinder or any spot hog builds stuff with
Yeah.
integrity like nobody's business. And there's a ton of good tough sites out there, but I think spot hog probably owns the reliability game because I mean, look at how their sites are built you know? And so the engineering we have today, the structural integrity that's in all the equipment, it's second to none. I mean, it really is. And so it's a great time to be in the archery industry because early on, like I say, I mean, I'd have customers come in and they'd be bleeding from their forehead and they'd have a big old,
Oh no.
bruise or a broken rib because they had an 80-pound bow break at the handle in half and it clubbed them in the head and it clubbed them in the belly and they were on a 3D shoot and all their buddies had to watch it and they're walking off the shoot and going through everybody and they're bleeding down their face like crazy because they got a big old crack in the top where the cam hit
Gosh.
them at the top of the head. We're kind of past those days, but I remember those guys coming in and they weren't happy, and guess
No.
who guess whose neck was on the line, and I'm just this, like, 27-year-old kid that just bought an archery shop, and they're flying through the door with either a set of broken wood limbs or a broken riser or broken cast riser, and they're not happy. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't see those things anymore, and I haven't for years. I
No.
mean, the reliability, the accuracy, user friendliness. I mean, I tell people it's like, when I first started, the compound bows were like the old teletype days, and then the early machine riser bows, that was kind of like your dial-up phones. And, now today we got like the smartphone, right? That does everything, it just, doesn't quite, butcher your animal in the field for you, but it, come pretty close. They're just it's that good. But all that said, um, no matter what we do with bows and arrows, for most all archers, except for a small percentage, 50 yards is a long shot.
Yeah.
Technology's kind of changed the rifle hunting world. I've got a lot of guys that cross over and, hunt with rifles and oh my gosh, what they can do with a rangefinder, a scope, and all these different calibers they have with rifles. That's crazy. But, we can make archery super accurate and we can make it user friendly and we can make it super reliable. But it's still you draw that bow with your hand and 50 yards, it's a challenge. I mean, a 50-yard shot, so much can happen with archery, and archery's hard. I mean, I don't know how many times in my archery career that, I had the animal already mounted on the wall before I ever drew my bow, and I never even got to
Yeah.
release an arrow, when I thought something in fact, I just had that happen in Molokai on an axis deer. I crawled up to this buck, he's bedded, I got good cover noise. I had to get a couple around a couple bushes and I got nothing but grass between me and him, but I have to get up to see, I have to raise up to see, where I'm gonna shoot this buck, and they don't give you a second chance. I drew my bow and I'm just creeping up, and when I get up, that buck swings and is gone. And I'm like, "Okay, that was cute." I let my bow down. I'm like, and pretty much I thought it was a slam dunk. I did everything right on the stock and everything, and I was coming up really slow, and he was just that sharp. And I'm convinced that those axis deer, I think they're kind of more in the antelope family. I think they can see color. And so I think that they just
Yeah.
recognize color really quick. I don't know how nocturnal they are. They're kind of they come from India and, they escape tigers and maybe they can see orange and white. I don't know because tigers in India, that's what jumps them. And they are the jumpiest deer and the spookiest deer. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I thought I had this buck down and I never even released an arrow. So,
I've heard so many stories. I've
and if
heard
it,
so many
and if
stories of them and how quick they are.
Oh, they're crazy. And, if it would have been a gun, I would have just taken him right there, he's just, sitting there looking around and, it would have just been a harvest, but archery's hard. I mean, it's bottom
Absolutely.
line. So my job as a pro shop owner is to try to eliminate everything that would add to that. outside of just flat out archery being hard. I need to eliminate and have all the boxes checked. Reliability box, make sure that, nothing's ever going to come loose on that bow. I mean, make sure that that bow's tuned to a T, make sure that it's performing its peak performance, make sure that everything that's on that bow is fitted to the archer to where he's super comfortable.
Absolutely.
So,
That's huge too, I've went through that phase. I had a time, like really early in college where, I'm just out of high school. I don't have a ton of money and I went the route of having the cheapest sight and the cheapest, everything else I could throw on a bow, and it
sure.
cost me a deer. It cost me a big hunt for me. And that's from I guess from that point on I really switched my thinking to, at that time when I was a lot more limited on funds, I'm like, I'd rather have a little bit cheaper of a bow, but I'd at least I'm gonna have that spot hog grinder sight, and I'm gonna have
Yeah.
that wise guy release, and I'm gonna have all these accessories that aren't gonna fail me because, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, but I feel like now, most of the bows out there, modern manufacturing are gonna get the job done. And if you skimp out on your sight or your rest or your release, that might cost you more than maybe getting a little bit cheaper of a bow would, in the grand scheme of your hunt, especially when you're talking about, 50 yards and in and those kinds of shots.
Yeah, I think that there's different levels of equipment. We sell a limb-driven rest, on our mid-range bows that's, it's made by AEE, Arizona Archery, and it's limb-driven, and so for kids bows, women's bows, light poundage bows, there's just not any way, shape, or form that I feel that you can go to a cable driven, style, fall away rest, but a limb driven, it doesn't affect the timing. They tune real well. I mean, it gives a good stable platform for the launch. And they're really inexpensive. I mean, they're under, $90, and it's a reliable rest. It really is, so, there's ways that, a guy can make an affordable setup really accurate and reliable, but, our number one, we've been a Hamsky fan forever. We're really
Yeah.
bad about, we're good and we're bad about what we believe in, and I don't have a lot of variety. I just don't stock a whole bunch of arrow rests because I'll be honest with you, I can't say this about too many things in my store, but and I'm not paid by Hamsky to do this. I just sell a lot of the rests, and but I always say this, like, if you were a heart surgeon and you had a heart valve that never failed in ever, and I mean, you'd been doing surgeries, basically your whole bloody life, and you had this heart valve and it just never failed. I mean, you're not going to use anything else, right? And then when you've tried
Absolutely.
other things, or you see other patients come in that have other heart and they failed, you wouldn't going to use those other heart valves, right? Because basically that arrow rest is the arterial artery coming out of that bow, and if it fails, you're done. It's
Yep.
over. And so,
Yep.
we I think it's been 14 or 15 years now we sold Hamsky arrow rests, and honestly, I had one guy run over a bow and broke the arrow rest. I had another guy roll like a side by side over, and it smashed the bow and wrecked the arrow rest. It's the only 2 arrow rests I've ever seen fail. They
Yeah.
don't fail. And if they do, it's because somebody, did something stupid, like they got on the side and they, wrenched there's 2 little dials, and they got on the Allen wrench and they just wound it up super tight or something. They just did something on their own. But, if you just, leave the shop, our shop or any shop that does a good job with setting up a Hamsky, it's going to be reliable. It's not going to fail.
Yep.
And we see so much failure rate with arrow rests. Not gonna say any names, but there is just a high failure rate with arrow rests. And we just don't see that with Hamsky. So we're bad, we're good and we're bad about, selling what we believe in, what we see that has just a tremendous amount of reliability and we get a lot of accuracy out of. There's a lot of good sites on the market. There really is. And I mean, of course, you already heard my spill on Spot Hog. I think they're definitely, the toughest. Just structural integrity it's undeniable. You can just look at the site the Spot Hog builds, and just like without a doubt, this site is built extremely well. But there's a lot of really good sites out there.
Yeah.
UltraView, Excel, for affordable site that's really good, Montana Black Gold. I mean, there's just we're big into option
Yeah.
archery. I love option sites. I think option site is, I'm I try to eliminate I sell a lot of option sites because I try to eliminate a guy that, comes from old school, shot a pin site, but he wants a mover. But I've seen so many guys that put movers on, and I hear the same story. It's like, dude, I was shooting in camp and we were shooting 80 yards and went out the next day elk hunting and called in a bull to 20 yards. And I forgot to move my sight back and I shot 4 feet over him. And it's like, I just when I hear those stories, it just but option,
Oh no.
the option 8 housing with 4 pins and a mover, 5 pins total, but with you got the one mover and you can open it, you can just have a single pin, but the pin just moves. So, that you can't make a mistake with it. You've got fixed pins, so another story that a good friend, Jack Fowler, he had this happen. He had a big bull, had a 2 pin, double pin spot hog, sight mover. And he had a bull step out at like, 62 yards and he set his sight and his brother-in-law cow calls. He draws his bow, his brother-in-law cow calls, and the bull turns and walks right up to him. And he said he didn't feel comfortable in trying to estimate how low to shoot. And he wound up trying to let his bow down and change his sight, and the bull ran off. He never saw it again. And for the old
Oh
school
no.
guys, I think option sites are a great option. This is the play on words, but because they can't really make a mistake with it. The body of the site doesn't move. But for younger guys that grew up with a mover, I mean, you live and die by a mover, right? And so
Yeah.
any younger guys that, hey, I've had a mover sight since I was a kid, they're not going to make a mistake. But, like I say, the older crowd like me, I remember the first time I put a mover on, did the same thing. I shot through the hood of one of my targets out on my archery range here at the farm. And, because I was shooting 80 and just swung over and didn't remember to put it back and, shot right through the hood and wasn't real happy with myself. So, there again, I was always a bow hunter freestyle guy, when I was competing. I wasn't a freestyler. I shot freestyle when I first started, and I did have an old Check It mover sight, really, really old sight. Um, but um, but later on, I just went to bow hunter freestyle because I always wanted to be a tournament archer to be a better bow hunter. That was my goal. It wasn't to
That's
be,
why I got
I
into it.
love shooting tournaments. I love shooting IBO. I shot the IBO Triple Crown in the Northwest back in the 90s. Absolutely loved it. But I always shot bow hunter freestyle. I just wanted to be a better bow hunter. And rangefinders back
Absolutely.
then aren't rangefinders like we have today. You know, we had these old rangefinders that would to bring 2 images together, and you'd look at the dial, and they don't really work. They were just garbage.
Yeah.
And so I remember the first Bushnell rangefinders that came out, they were like these big suitcase, and it had an eyeball in the middle, but they were the first laser that came out, and then rapidly they changed from there. So, that really helped archers out, was good rangefinders. Now, there's several rangefinder binoculars. Leica's got one. GPO, German Precision Optics, got one. I think Swarovski's got one. I mean, there's a lot of binocular rangefinders out there now that are pretty awesome. Leica's got one, so for the high end, but just anybody, a little Vortex or Leopold, or there's a lot of different, little handheld, rangefinders out there that are really good, and affordable. So
Yeah.
those have been big help for bow hunters in the field. But those are just things that I've seen, that have really, helped out the archery industry and changed the archery industry.
Absolutely. We've talked a little bit about, some of these hunts that guys have been on and things have just, maybe not gone their way, or even your most recent hunt here and having that stalk not go
Mhm.
your way. If there was one that you could pinpoint, is there an example of a hunt that you've been on that you feel like represents everything you are capable of as a bow hunter? A hunt that just kind of pushed you to that limit of what you're capable of.
Oh boy. I've had a lot of elk hunts that have pushed me to the limit. I'm an elk hunter. I love backcountry. We've got a lot of backcountry deer, black-tailed deer here. Um, that's one of the it's a harder hunt because of the weather. So the late blacktail hunt here in Oregon is hard because of weather. It's not everybody sees the humor in 38 degrees and pouring down rain. You can have, 34 degrees and wet snow. You're in the I typically hunt wilderness. There's a lot of country that isn't wilderness, and there's some great bucks outside of the wilderness, but pretty much anymore, I just stay with our wilderness areas, and I have for a lot of years. Our low country has a lot of poison oak, and I get poison oak terrible. And I try to avoid hunting areas because the deer live in it. And when I get it, I've got it for three
Yeah.
weeks, and but it's elevation sensitive, so it's not up in the high country. And so, I just that's one of the reasons that really drew me up there when I was younger, because I was down here, there was a lot of deer, and we would kill a lot of deer down here, and I would always just like month and a half, I'd be just fighting horrible poison oak,
Yeah.
outbreak, and even got shots and pills for it before. But so that was one good reason to really draw me up there. And then my dad had hunted the high country for years when he was young. And my dad was born in 1917, so he had some years under his belt when I was born. I was the last of 9 kids in a blended family. And so he had a lot of history of backcountry hunting, and he was the one that really, we would take horses and put in the old horse camp, and then we would hunt out of that. And he was kind of just old school. And of course, with the technology advancements, I figured out real quick that we did llamas for a lot of years. I grew up with horses, and everybody else always had good horses. We never had good horses. And my dad he'd always tell me everybody else that he knew that he was friends with had great horses, and we didn't. And so I kind of didn't
Yeah.
grow up with a love for horses. Our horses were horrible. I got bit, stepped on, kicked, bucked off. I mean, one old yellow jacket or hornet's nest in the trail, and 12, 13, 14-year-old kid just starting hunting, finding himself 13 feet in the air, coming down in a windfall because, the horse is getting stung, and he bucked me off, and I weigh, maybe 60, 70 pounds soaking wet, and I'm flying through the
Yeah.
air, bleeding all over. And then the horse is
Not a
jumping
good
on
deal.
top of me, and now I can't walk, and he stepped on my foot. And I've got all kinds of stories like that that happened to me when I was young. But, we figured out real quick. We used llamas for a lot of years, and then we just figured out like, hey, let's just get in shape. Let's stay in shape. Let's pack it out. But, backcountry hunts that pushed me to my limit. My hunting partner Brian Richardson and I called in a bull for him in Colorado in the Zirkles, and we were in the southern part of the Zirkles, and we came up through all this basically sheep country. And we climbed up through these cliffs with bivy packs on the best route we could find our way to get into these basins. And spotted some elk up there. It was high altitude. It's 11, 12,000 feet. There wasn't a lot to breathe up there. And we spent one night, spotted some elk. The next day we whittled our way in there, and I called in a bull, a great bull, and Brian arrowed it. And I'll never forget, I did the runaway thing when I was calling, and he stayed put, and it sounded like the bull was bugling on top of him. And then it was all silence, and he come walking up the hill, and he goes, "Are you ready to pack meat?" I'm like, "Oh boy." And that was probably one of our most challenging pack outs because of the altitude and then the distance. And then it took us 2 full days of leapfrogging meat, and then we didn't have any water.
Wow.
So we packed
Wow.
meat for 1 full day, and the next day when we woke up, it was 80-degree weather, and we had about 12 ounces of water between the two of us. And by that afternoon, we were pretty strapped. And that evening, we ran into a bow hunter that was hiking in on this old miners road, this old miners trail. And we see him coming, and I mean, we're literally like so dehydrated we can't even hardly speak, and we're still we're moving this meat. And we asked him, like, dude, is there any water between here and the end of the trail? And we still had about 7 miles to go to get out to the end. end of this trail. And he goes, nope. He goes, a bunch of old mining shafts. And there was mining shafts all the way up and down. They had this greasy looking like black water. Like we knew better not, we're not touching that. We're going to die.
Yeah.
I mean, we had good filtrations, but like, we're not doing that. No way. And no matter how thirsty we get. And he goes, but he goes, this is the deal. He goes, when you get out to my truck, he goes, I got a blue Chevy parked at the end of the trailhead. And he goes, I got a cooler. It's full of water. You're welcome to it. And we're like, oh, thank you, Jesus. We're just like, let's go. And so we made these we were leapfrogging meat. It was taking us, a couple 2 trips. We had our camp and a bunch of meat, and then we go back and get a bunch of meat. So we were making these 2 trips. And we always what we call leapfrog and meat. So you go like mile and a half, 2 miles, drop it, go back, mile and a half, 2 miles, take a rest, go another mile and a half, 2 miles, drop it, come back, get the other load. So when you're out, you're not like, I don't have to go back in, 14 miles to get a load of meat. And so, that's always what we've done, depending on how much uphill or downhill. Sometimes if it was downhill, good downhill, we go 3 miles. So we got down to this point that where we could look down and we could like 2 miles down there, we could see the trailhead. We could see this guy's truck with our binoculars, like, oh, there it is. And so we bust our butt, just go all the way out with that meat, get down there, drop our pack. Sure enough, cooler in the back of the truck, open the cooler up, you know, there's probably 16 bottles of Gatorade with water in them, frozen hard as a brick.
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Oh,
And I
no.
mean, we're just like, that was like more punishment. Now we've got, there's no way to melt it, it's and I
Yeah.
looked at Brian and I go, buddy, I'll go back and get the last load of meat because we were a 45-minute drive from the trailhead that we went in on, from the trailhead we came out on. And I go, just go try to find a ride. And
Wow.
luckily he found a camp down the road and they were just pulling out and they gave him a ride back to our vehicle. And so, he rescued me in about, 2 hours later, he come pulling in and I'm like, oh, of course, we had water then, but,
Yeah.
that was a hunt that pushed us to the limit. Um, I've had a lot of really crazy hunts, and we don't have time to, talk about them. I had a Canadian moose hunt one time that, was probably the all-time longest story and craziest story ever, and that was back in, the '80s. So, that was a long, long time ago. Or no, it was
Yeah.
that was in the early '90s. That was in the early '90s, and that was a crazy deal, but, don't have time. That story takes a lot of time. But,
No worries.
there's been, uh, there's been all kinds of things. My wife got lost in Wyoming, Black Hawk helicopters, searching all night, horrible, horrible, you know, rain and then snow and then temperatures dropping to like 14 degrees and we came back to camp. She was supposed to stay in camp. She wasn't in camp. We were about 8 or 9 miles from where the vehicle was parked from where our camp was. Search and rescue came in. We had Black Hawk helicopters. I mean, it was a crazy story, but I've told it a few times, but we don't have time for that either. But that was
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And
We're
but
getting tight on time, and I know you got to
yeah,
go here, but I do
sure,
have a question that I want to ask you, and I like to ask a lot of our guests here. If there's
okay,
any piece of advice that you could give to those people that are listening that are maybe early on their journey, like for me, I'm going to be starting my first couple of trips travel hunting out of state this upcoming
yeah.
season. So people that are early in the travel hunting journey, maybe early in their archery journey, what's the best piece of advice you can give those folks as they kind of buckle up and get ready for those upcoming phases of whatever it is they want to pursue there?
So it's 2 parts. First part is buy points for Wyoming. It's a land of milk and honey. Um, Along with that, always put in for New Mexico. It's a lottery, there's no points. Put in for elk and deer in New Mexico, start buying antelope points, deer points, and, elk points in Wyoming if you're young. Um, I've said it for years, both those states are the land of milk and honey for a bow hunter. Utah is tough. There's not a lot of opportunity in Utah. For their premium hunts, you would have had to got in really early. I don't know if it's worth it. Nevada and Montana, those are possibilities, for points. I mean, it's going to take a while, but if play the long game, both those can be rewarding for elk and deer. Um, Idaho is just they went to a draw system this year, so you can put in a party. There's some famous units in Idaho, and they've got good stats. I mean, you can look at their percentages for, bow hunter success, and there's some really, really outstanding units in Idaho, and it's all on their website. You can do the research. Um, whether you're a Go Hunt member or whether you're, a Hunt and Fool member, there's a lot of different, tools out there now that can help you determine, I'm a big Hunt and Fool. I love Hunt and Fool, Eastman's Journal, Eastman's, it can also, you can be an Eastman's member and they have very comprehensive tools. There's a lot of stuff online, but I'm old school. I like sitting down with with the comprehensive stuff like an Eastman's MR section or Hunt and Fool, because you've got it right there in front of
Yeah.
you, and you can just research it and you can highlight the units that you're interested in, and like Oregon, for example, Oregon, Washington, we don't do a very good job with management. We shoot a lot of our elk in damage hunts, our elk units now, we don't have over the counter opportunity. We had 16 more units 3 years ago go into a special draw for archery. So, for out of state guys, we're not a great destination anymore. Used to be you could come here and hunt and hunt a
Yeah.
lot of different units, and it was a big opportunity. So that went to 5%. So, I probably wouldn't encourage you to ever buy a point. I think it was well, there's been several writers that have all, outdoor writers like, just, don't buy points for Oregon. It's a waste of time. So, you know, dishing on my own state there, it can be a tough deal. But those are some of the states. Colorado, has always had a lot of opportunity, and I think they still do have some pretty fair opportunity. But that's part of it. That's the first part is it, it takes a little investment, but if you start when you're young, like you're young, start when you're young, by the time you're in your 50s, if you stay in good shape and you stick to a fitness program, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity that you could hunt, if you stick with it. But those are the states I would really center on. Is Wyoming, New Mexico, and then of course, New Mexico and Idaho you can throw in every year. Somebody's got to win them, right? Somebody's got to win those
Absolutely.
tags. Yeah, but yeah, the because elk opportunity is just getting squeezed in the West. The last part I'll offer is, in today's times, um, I think faith is giant. It's giant in my life. Most everybody, grows in their faith in the Lord and their knowledge, and so that's the second part. I mean, because to really appreciate life, to appreciate every blessing, for quality of family, quality of life, just having a good appreciation for everything God's given you. Our life's just beginning here, because we're just sands. My hourglass is really low, and I don't have that many sands left in my hourglass, and I'm gonna go from here to glory. And I would wish that for everybody. And just that feeling you get in the outdoors when you're out there and you're looking around in God's creation, He created that for your enjoyment, for your pleasure. That's all there because He loves us. And every bit of that beauty and every bit of that wonderment and all the creatures that we pursue, I mean, that's just the glory of God right there. I mean, that's how fantastic He is, and the more you get into the Word of God, the more sense it makes. Every man needs a good foundation, and that foundation needs to be the Word of God. And that's the second part of it.
Wayne, it's a great way to end it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you coming on so much. And thank you for being a part of this and making the time for me today.
You bet. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll catch you next week.
All
I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of the Non-Typical Project. If you're interested in our special guest, their information, as well as my information and our sponsors' links, are all going to be down in the description below. If you guys could, be sure to leave a positive review for the podcast, as it helps me out a ton. If you got any questions or anything that caught your eye during this podcast, you can leave a comment down below, and I'll be sure to get back to you as quick as possible. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next week.